My name is S.Paul, and today we'll be discussing homeostasis. What is homeostasis? Well, first of all, homeostasis is used in biology and chemistry quite frequently, and it's basically referring to a condition of equilibrium or balance that exists in a body's internal environment. And this balance or equilibrium exists within a normal physiological range, meaning that our blood pressure, our temperature, our pH in the stomach, our blood glucose levels, they all exist within a normal range. And once we deviate away from this narrow range, it can cause very serious health effects in a living organism. And ultimately, if we're not able to regulate homeostasis at all, it will lead to death. So as you can imagine, this has such an important role in our body. It is also highly regulated by feedback systems. So as I mentioned before, homeostasis is maintained by feedback systems, and it's usually under two different systems that exerts their influence on this feedback system: the endocrine system and the neuronal system. So the endocrine system releases hormones into the bloodstream, and it's a little bit slower acting, but it has a long-term effect. So their effects are long-lasting in the body. The nervous system will send an action potential to another area of the brain or to another neuron, and it will relay information quite rapidly. However, this information is also dissipates very quickly. So that's the trade-off between neuronal and endocrine. And it's important to remember that the homeostasis and the feedback systems are both regulated by these endocrine and nervous systems, so you have a mesh of the two systems interacting with each other. And a basic feedback system is composed of three components: a sensory receptors, a control center, and an effector. And as shown in my PowerPoint slide here, the flow of information occurs this way. So the sensory receptor will detect a change in stimuli, and it will send or input information into the control center, which is usually the brain or spinal cord. And the brain or spinal cord or the control center will then relay information to an effector to trigger a response. For example, when you exercise, your heart rate goes up, your temperature goes up, and you become hot. So we need to have in our body some type of cooling mechanism to release heat into the environment. So the thermoreceptors or the baroreceptors in our body will detect changes in blood pressure and changes in temperature, and it'll signal this information to the control center, the brain, and the brain will then send information to the blood vessels or the baroreceptors and cause dilation of the blood vessels to release heat into the external environment, and also produce sweat to have a cooling mechanism once the body gets too hot. So this is all under a feedback system, and this is how homeostatic control is exerted in a living organism. So there are many different ways and examples that homeostasis is controlled in a feedback example, but I thought it would be interesting to go over how can you identify when homeostasis is dysregulated or dysfunctional. Well, there are different signs and symptoms that are apparent in an individual or a living organism that can kind of indicate that this individual is having homeostatic control problems. For example, signs, there are observable differences or changes that occur in an organism, and this can be swelling, increased blood pressure, increased heart rate. Those are all distinguishable signs that indicate something is different and something may be amiss. Symptoms are non-observable signs, but can also indicate that something is amiss. For example, a headache, having anxiety, and so on and so forth. Those are things that are hard to identify in another individual. However, they can also indicate that there is some type of homeostatic dysregulation that is occurring. And finally, especially in humans and maybe in some animals, when we're not able to have our own control over homeostasis, or when our body is unable to perform this intervention or regulation, there needs to be some type of medical intervention to ensure that we're able to have proper homeostatic control. For example, a person with diabetes, they are not able to regulate their own blood glucose levels under normal physiological conditions. And as you guys know, there can be very disastrous consequences for diabetes, such as limb loss, blindness, and so on and so forth, when the insulin levels are not tightly, or the blood glucose levels are not tightly regulated. Therefore, a person with diabetes will take insulin to help them regulate their blood glucose levels and maintain proper homeostatic control in their systems. Well, thank you for listening to my lecture on homeostasis. I hope it kept you interested. See you soon. Bye.